Now we'll look at a couple of examples. In the first one, we have a Roosevelt High School. There are 6 more students on the newspaper staff. So we have our newspaper staff. Then on the boys varsity tennis team. And we have a total of 42 students. The 2 questions that they want us to answer are how many students are on the newspaper? So there's one question, how many on newspaper? And the other question, how many are on the tennis team? And they let us know that there aren't any students involved in both of these organizations. So to be 6 more is still going to be plus, just like it was before. Our second step, now that we've read the problem and made some notes, is to define a variable. So this is where things get a little different from before. In the past problems, the variable was just always a number or the number. In this case, we have to pick what the variable is going to stand for. So since the newspaper staff is being compared to the tennis team, I'm going to let my variable be t and have it stand for the number of students on the tennis team. And then if there are 6 more students on the newspaper staff than there are on the tennis team, that means if I take the number of students on the tennis team and add 6 to it, it will give me the number of students on the newspaper staff. And then they tell me that those 2 groups together are a total of 42. So the 2 groups together is going to mean that if I add those 2 groups, I'll get a total of 42. So writing this out as an equation, I'm going to write t plus 6 equals 42. Now the associative property will let me regroup these to put the t's together. So I end up with 2 t's plus 6 equals 42. Subtracting 6 from both sides, I'll get 2t equals 36. And then dividing both sides by 2, I get t equals 18. Then I need to go back and remember what it was that t was standing for. Now t was standing for the number of students on the tennis team. But the questions I was asked to solve was not just the tennis team number of students, but also the newspaper number of students. So for my final answer, I'm going to write 18 students on the tennis team, and then 18 plus 6 would give me 24 students on the newspaper. I'm going to double check just the equation part of my math to make sure that this does add up to the required 42. And sure enough, I do get the right total. But you'll remember that I said from the rules that we're going to follow that we aren't going to just check it with our equation, we're also going to check it against the original story and make sure it makes sense. So going back in, at Roosevelt High School, there are 6 more students on the newspaper staff than on the tennis team. So if there are 24 students on the newspaper staff and 18 students on the tennis team, that does make a total of 42 students. In our next example, we are looking at a t-ball team for 5-year-olds, and it has half as many girls as boys. So I have a number here that says 5-year-olds. I have half as many girls as there are boys, and that there are a total of 15 children on the team. And the questions that they want me to answer: how many boys and how many girls? So I've gone through and made my notes. Now I need to define my variable. Well, looking again at this, I see that girls is explained in terms of boys, or is compared to boys, that there's only half as many girls as there are boys. So if I let B stand for boys on team, then 1/2 of B is going to stand for the girls on the team. And when I add those two together, it should be a total of 15. So writing this algebraically, I have B plus 1/2 B equals 15. I'll put my invisible 1 in front of this B, and then even write it as 2/2 so that I can add it to the other 1/2. That gives me 3/2 of a B equaling 15. And then to get B alone, I'll multiply by the reciprocal. Multiplying by 2/3 there leaves me with B, and multiplying by 2/3 on the other side leaves me with 10. So going back to the way I defined my variables, that means that there are 10 boys on the team, and since girls are half the number of the boys, and half of 10 is 5, there will be 5 girls on the team. I double check that that adds up to the 15 it was supposed to, and it does. And then I go back and check it with the story. There was another thing I should have pointed out here at the beginning. You'll notice that there's a 5 up here that doesn't really have anything to do with the problem. And that will happen frequently in story problems. They'll give you these extra numbers, dates or player numbers, or things that don't have anything to do with the problems we're trying to do. So that's another thing that you have to be aware of when you're reading through story problems, that not every number in the story problem will necessarily be used. It just so happens that there are 5 of these 5-year-olds, but if they were 8-year-olds or 12-year-olds that had this same spread on the team, it wouldn't change the outcome. Okay? So if we go back and read our problem again, a t-ball team for 5-year-olds has 5 girls and 10 boys, and this is a total of 15 children. So it looks like our story checks out. And I think I'll wait for the next video for our next example.